Well, greetings everyone. My guest on my channel this time, following on from the wonderful Colonel McGregor, who was my last guest, I have a lady who is no less formidable, believe me, June Slater, who is a wonderful advocate for applied common sense. And of course, if you subscribe to my channel, you'll almost certainly know her. It's unlikely you subscribe to mine and not hers. But the great thing about June is not only is she a fountain of complete common sense, she does it all with a sense of humour. And this is absolutely wonderful, because when I tell everybody how things are panning out, whether it's the economy or the global geopolitical military strategy, everybody crawls away into their study and whips out the old wartime souvenir and shoots themselves. Whereas when June tells everybody how it is, and she's accurate, full of common sense, absolutely marvellous, people watch her with a bit of a chuckle, because she brings some humour into the whole situation, which of course is absolutely marvellous. And she's a great favourite of mine. This was going to be a Q&A game really, but it turned into a discussion, and of course there's a lot more of June, quite rightly, and quite as I planned it should be, a lot more of June than there is of me. And I hope you enjoy it. It's quite a long one, and we'll break it down a little bit for you, and you can dip in and out. But as always, whenever June's involved, it's entertainment. Now, I gather you're a keen gardener, aren't you?
Yeah.
We just had a friend round for coffee this morning. She helps out with the horses. She was talking about, I think, some BBC gardening programme, which has gone hopelessly woke. And she had us in stitches this morning about, we don't watch it, but even gardening's woke.
Yeah, everything they touch. I mean, I used to enjoy programs like The One Show, but the trouble with the BBC, they use every opportunity in their light entertainment to get a message across. They're worse than Disney.
I know.
And, you know, they're on the wrong side of the fence. It's as simple as that. Kids going to school can identify as a cat. When I first found that out, and this woman was going on about how her daughter was so upset. It was in America, this one. Because she'd gone to school identifying as a cat, and this teacher had sent her home. And I said, identifying as a cat, you see, it's a parenting to me. Because I'd turn around, if my daughter identified as a cat, she'd be pooping in a cat litter, she'd have Sheba for tea, she'd have 24 hours to decide not to be a cat. Otherwise, she'd live like one. She'd have a fleet collar on. She wouldn't get away with it.
What was your business when you were in business?
My first business was a driving school, and I was particularly busy because I was the only female instructor in the town. And whilst all the other driving instructors were moaning about being quiet, I was run off my feet. And I employed I bought 2 more cars and employed these 2 gay instructors, because we had predominantly women and young people for clients who were sick of being bollocked by the husband or father about moving the seat and moving the mirror. And I did really well, but I handled it different. So it's not really about what you did when you were in business. Then I went into mobile phones when they were the size of a brick, and the money making angle of that was really the billing, you know, getting the airtime. And then latterly furnishings, which we were in for 20 years. And then we sold out, not the actual business. We had a property that a developer wanted, and we sold that with enough money to retire. And I said to my husband on the day that we'd hit it, when we signed, I said, that's it. It doesn't matter what happens from this moment on. I am not going back to work. I'm going to fill my house with dogs. I'm going to stay at home. I'm going to do my garden, and I'm going to wake up every morning and want it to be repeated again. And I've lived like that ever since. I look at Rishi Sunak and I want to think of a Gene Kelly movie. When he comes out at number 10, I just want him to slide out and go, putting on my top hat, putting on the tails. It just doesn't look serious. It's like a supply teacher taking the reins for globalization. It's frightening. And they're trying to like American it up by letting his wife speak at the conference to tell you how marvellous it is. The day my husband has to stand up and tell you how marvellous I am is the day I pack up. You don't do it, do you? You do it on. Did Nigel Farage ever need that? I don't think so. You know, you can see what you're getting with him. And then, of course, we've got Jeremy Hunt, Mr. China. So my background's been business, and I've never bothered about politics. I never took any notice of politics. And my husband used to say, he used to look at me sideways and he'd go, "You've no idea, have you? You've just no bloody idea." And I go, "What? I'm happier than you. You're always sat there with a bloody long face with Sky News on. I'm happy. What's wrong with you?" And we had a house in Austria at the time. And then we got attacked at the Channel Tunnel. And I went, "Who the bloody hell's this lot?" And he went, "You really have..." I didn't even know what Sangat was. I didn't know about the migrant camp. Didn't know a thing. And then because the crossing the channel got a bit scary, I thought, this shouldn't happen in peacetime. We're not at war with anyone. This is getting scary. We can't cross at night because they're throwing bricks at the car and they're stowing away. We can't, this is wrong. So I started questioning things. And when I caught up to my husband's level of knowledge, my hair stuck on him like Bart Simpson. Oh, good God, no. And I went, people need to know. People need to know this. So I volunteered for Vote Leave. And I put my name forward, and then they contacted me. So I went out campaigning at the weekends. That's where I met Nigel Evans. And I got more involved with a few more Tories who were Brexiteers like Rab and Steve Baker. And I kind of got to know them through the Bruges group. But I knew that this campaigning at the weekend was rubbish because people were busy. They didn't want interrupting. They made their mind up. They were either, "We know what you're on about, love. We're voting Brexit," which most of them were in my town, or they've made their mind up to remain, and they're usually woolly-backed liberals. So I got more involved with Vote Leave, and I came back from town one day. I was so fed up. The market superintendent had to get me down off a bench because I was like Billy Graham. I'd lost it. I was going, "Do you understand what the European Union is really about? It is not about pet passports. It's not about easy travel. It's about getting you in till you can't get out. Then they'll do what the hell they want with us. It's communism." And I was getting a really big cheer, but I didn't realise it was the winos from the town at the front of the... I gathered this crowd. It was the winos that liked it. And then the market superintendent said, "You'll have to get down off that bench. Can you manage?" I said, "I got up. Of course I can manage." She said, "We'll have to sort of like get you to move on." So I came home and I was that fed up, Godfrey. I whipped my laptop up and I said, "Do you realise you can't even name any of the 5 presidents from the EU without using Google? And if you want your Prime Minister to do one..." And I did this do one thing where I said, "Gordon Brown, do one." And I put my finger up and I said, what's he called? "David Cameron, do one." And I did this short video. I said, if you don't like your Prime Minister, you can tell him to do one. You can't do that with the EU. You got 1.9 million views.
Whoa.
And this was just, coming up to Brexit. And David said to me, "What are followers?" I said, "Oh, I think that's when you don't know them and they're not your friends, but they're looking at what you've put on your page." And he said, "Well, you've got 5,000 followers. I went, "What?" I thought that was enormous. And from nowhere. And after the video went out, it went up to about 20,000. And then it's kind of rolled on from there. And I've never give up. But I talk to people in language they can understand. Because what's happened with politicians, they're so up their own backsides that they talk in a manner that basically they use vocabulary. I call it management speak. They use terminology that they're used to in journalism and politics. So what I did going through Brexit, when they were talking about stuff that normal people didn't understand, I did little meetings on Facebook Messenger. So I'd do hairdressers or an engineering firm. They'd sit down and get their lunch. We'd put the laptop up and I'd go, "Right, ask me some questions." And they said, "Well, what does it mean when it says global reach? What's the GDP?" Some people don't even know what the GDP is. So, well, that's like the turnover of the business that you're in. It's like what the country turns over. That's our general domestic product. That's what that is. And explaining the simple stuff and why Brexit was better for us because we had such a wide global reach, better than any other member state, and explaining how we are the customer. We are the best customer for the EU. because we spend so much money with them. We ski down their slopes, we sit on their beaches, we drink their wine, eat their cheese, we buy their cars and clothes. What do they buy from us? Very little. So why isn't the EU looking after us? Because not only that, we've got the highest credit card debt in Europe. We're spenders. Where the Germans will conserve. They'll buy a good car or a good coat and keep it longer. We will just squander it in a few years with furniture in particular. 5 years, they'll buy a new suite, new carpet, they'll change it all. We do that. French and Germans don't do that. Austrians don't do it. And then when we bought our second home in Austria, we've been in the south of France before that, and you see how Europe gets a much better deal out of the EU than we do. They don't think they do, but they do. I mean, Germany, when we drove to Austria, the A8, which is hundreds of kilometres long, was being made from 2-lane into 3-lane on EU money. The whole of the A8, that is an enormous project with bridges and flyovers and felling of trees. They just do what they want to the Germans. And the whole EU is set up to make them flourish. They were going to lead the pack. They were going to be the manufacturing hub, and France and Spain were going to be the agriculture. We were going to be raped, and we were. We were going to be nothing. We were just going to be a cash cow for the tax system. And then I found out, because once you become reliable, people contact you. And a guy from the EU contacted me, and I thought, well, I don't know if he's genuine or not. And he said, whilst Dominic Raab was having meetings with Barnier, Jeremy Corbyn was also having meetings. He wasn't even in power. And not only that, before that, there was Ollie Robbins. No one had heard of him. I outed him on Facebook. And I said, I think I called him, you can't put this in, but I used to have a thing each week, shithead of the week, and I'd highlight someone that you didn't know about that was affecting decision making, usually a civil servant or snivel servant, as I call them. And Ollie Robbins was one of my first, so I put this picture up. Do you know who this is? No, they don't know who this is. He's Ollie Robbins. He's having meetings with Barnier simultaneously, cutting a different deal for Theresa May completely to what was being pushed to the public with David Davis and subsequently Dominic Raab. So I did stuff like that to show people how slippery these characters were that we were entrusting our vote with, and they were slippery. And that, you know, they've engineered it to such a degree now that the vote has become meaningless. It doesn't matter if Labour or Tories get in; they're both taking us down the same road, and the destination lies ahead. It's the same place where we lose sovereignty now, not through Brexit, but through non-government organisations like the WHO, the UN, the IMF, the OECD. Everybody's running things from a global perspective. That cannot work. It's never going to be right that someone in Geneva can tell someone in Oslo when they can leave the house because there might be a pandemic. Because, as you know, even with the climate, I'm sat here now in beautiful sunshine, and 30 miles down the road they're having rain. So you can't, one size doesn't fit all. We need more control of our day-to-day lives.
Right, June, I tell you what I'd like to just talk about, and I know it's close to your heart, and that is budgets. And whenever I've been lecturing at university and people say, how would you handle it? What would you do if you were Prime Minister? What would you do? Who would be your Chancellor of the Exchequer? I always say I would get a good working northern housewife or businesswoman to do that, because they know how to balance a budget. They're used to keeping plates in the air, balancing a budget. Chancellor of the Exchequer, generally speaking, over the years have come from Oxford, where you have to have a lobotomy before you actually start, before you can qualify. They've never had to balance a budget. And of course, they then work for an organisation, the Treasury, which can print or borrow at will. So they have no experience of it. And I have never heard any general election where the national debt or the budget has been part of the debate. Nobody ever discusses it. What they do discuss is how much more money they will spend on whatever the subject happens to be, whatever that's going to buy them votes. So we all know that voters are bribed with their own money. So tell us about your view of budgets. You are that lady I would make Chancellor if I was Prime Minister. You are that very lady, which is absolutely delightful. So you far away. Tell us what you'd do, where you'd start, and how you handle it.
Well, if you look at the way, I'll say, a housewife or a woman, even a working woman running a home would do it, you would look at the immediate needs, make sure you've got enough money for those. Then secondary to that are the frills and fancies, the treats out, the holidays, changing the car, whatever. There should be a similar list for a country. And I think where we go wrong with budgets, there are too many people in politics, especially going for top jobs in the ministry, that really their goal is to be a player on the world stage, not to balance the books. So Britain is used as a cash cow. We're quite an affluent country, with a pretty good economy. Even in its dire straits, we're better than a lot of countries. But we don't utilise what we've got, and we don't treat people properly. So if I was a chancellor, for a start, I would never have ripped off the 1950s women's state pension and used the money for other stuff. If they wanted to delay the pension, they should have done it for a group of people who were coming up to school leaving age, not people who have paid in for 30 years. That's bad management of money. But they're never brought to account, because what tends to happen is, like Gordon Brown selling the gold off. How ridiculous. He even announced it beforehand. That's like putting all your stuff on eBay and saying, I'm going to put my stuff on eBay. It's going to be really cheap. So you're only going to get cheap prices. And he'd no business doing that. So then he doesn't care because he's out. It's not his responsibility anymore. Somebody else comes in and they pick up the gauntlet. So there's no accountability, whereas a housewife is accountable. If she doesn't have enough money to pay the mortgage or the bills, then the electric is cut off. The notice comes from the landlord or the building society. So because there's accountability in a household, those values should be moved forward for a country. And the last thing we should ever have done, and David Cameron did it, is tie our foreign aid into the GDP. We are bound by law to give 0.7%. Other countries, have a look at how they're doing. And if they've not done as well, they give slightly less. It shouldn't be tied into a percentage, because to me, that's like, okay, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to donate all my money to a dog's charity, but I can't afford to pay my mortgage. That's bad economy. And we're having one after another, after another, after another. I don't think there's been a decent chancellor since Nigel Lawson, but I could be biased.
Yeah, it's interesting how the government can always find something to send abroad. And what people don't understand, being a boring, geeky economist by profession, is that 0.07, if you take that, that's a part of the growth, the growth in GDP, which is a slightly dodgy way of actually monitoring an economy, incidentally. But that's a deep subject for another day, maybe. But that 0.07% of the growth in GDP, let's say, for example, your growth in GDP is only 1%, or maybe less than 1% in difficult times, and we're going into difficult times. That's can be almost 40% or anywhere near 50% of your growth. So if the country grows pretty poorly by a couple of percent, we're giving 50% away. And of course, the other point is we're giving all that money away, and it's not audited. There's no audit trail, and that's the point. So we don't even know where it's going. And if you were going to appropriate a budget, which I don't think you and I would have anyway, surely that would go, the overseas budget should go towards dealing with people from overseas who land on our shores. So that budget isn't even going to the right place at the right time. And then, of course, you end up, do you not, with people having to get rid of the budget. And the army was like that, my old days in the army. If you hadn't used up your supply of ammunition, you were terrified you wouldn't get it for the next year. So it was use it or lose it. So we used to fire indiscriminately down the range for days on end to get rid, so we didn't lose it next year, because you couldn't carry over the budget. Doesn't make any sense. Would you agree, as you have a big feedback on your channel, that this is the most resented bit of government spending, I think, of almost the whole lot? this unaudited overseas foreign aid. So have you any clue why do they do this? Why do they do something which is so clearly morally wrong? All the government voted for it. The government voted for the backbench MPs, all voted for it, and something which is universally so disliked by the electorate.
Well, because I think that proves that they're not bothered about what, for a number of years now, they've not been concerned about what the electorate really thinks. We're just in the way. I mean, you've only got to look at Keir Starmer. He'd sooner deal with Davos than Westminster. Why? Because Westminster comes with constituents, those annoying little pesky people that want you to put the roads right and that want you to, upgrade the drainage and get a gully wagon coming around more often to stop streets flooding that didn't used to flood. We want basic things like that. And the trouble is, everybody's focused on the world stage. So on the world stage, they're not looking at the country. They're looking at how the country can cooperate with the rest of the world. And to me, that should be a secondary thing after you've sorted your country out. Our country is not in a position to give that sort of money away. Now, everybody will tell you that that's because trade deals are on the back of foreign aid. Some of them, where the foreign aid thing is most ludicrous currently, is that the only reason that China and India have a get out of jail card with the net zero targets is because they get foreign aid. Because they're considered growing economies. It's in the Paris Accord. It's written down. They can increase the use of fossil fuels because they get foreign aid. So here we have a massive, massive country like China that's spewing out emissions like a drunk on the back of a Glasgow bus. And they can continue to do that. And they can continue to do that because they get foreign aid from countries like us who are going to basically cripple people, make them live a lesser life to get to net zero. And as I've said before with net zero, on the day we get to net zero, that day will come when somebody looks at a graph and says, Frank, guess what? We're at net zero. Nothing changes. The atmosphere doesn't change. The trees don't change. The sea doesn't change. Nothing changes from 1% to net zero. It's a false target. It's a pointless target. Meanwhile, in China, they've just built an 1,800-kilometre train line to take coal to power stations that they're building. And if anybody wants an idea of what 1,800 kilometres is like, if you set off from my house in the north of England and drive to my house that I used to have in Austria, that's 1,800 kilometres. So right down England, right down northern France, hook a left at Metz, right across the whole of Germany, into Austria, right to the southern tip of Austria, and that's 1,800 kilometres. That's just one railway to ferry coal. That's not for anything else. So the construction of it, the cement that's been used, all this carbon footprint stuff we talk about, that's just so that China can continue to improve and grow the use of fossil fuels. Well, we are going to have to put heat pumps in houses that won't keep them warm. Insulate houses, they don't tell you that you're going to have extra radiators. And when you insulate your house, you're going to have to do the floors, ceilings and walls and change your windows. They don't tell you all that. And they still won't be efficient. The only way heat pumps will be efficient is if the house is purpose-built to accommodate it. You talk to any heating engineer, they'll tell you how duff they are. So we have this obtuse logic, and the problem is the politicians are young, career-minded politicians. They're far too young. The cabinet's too young. We should have older people who have had more time on the planet to live a life, to watch a family grow up, to pay for a family to grow up, to see the grandchildren, to see the desires and hopes that they have, and try and make those real. Rather than people who are in their late 20s, early 30s that have come out of an institutionalized thinking like the universities, then straight into being a SPAD or an aide in Parliament, then straight into being an MP. They've no life experience. They've never run a business. I mean, you've only got to look at how they run their offices. You've got Nazim Zahawi we were paying for his stables heating. Oh, it got overlooked. How can you overlook that? That would not get overlooked in this house. I would know that my constituents were paying for my horses to stay warm. It would not get done. The first thing, and there was the expense candle, so it all got kind of sorted out a bit. But we've got these, every single problem we have is because politicians are focused on being a world player. They love the TV. They love sound bites. They love interviews. They love turning up in the jets in the smart suits and shaking hands with foreign dignitaries. They love it. It's a drug. They're not thinking about running the country. They're just enjoying being semi-famous, and they're not pretty enough to go into the movies. So we end up with them in politics.
Yeah, that's H.L. Mencken, I think, wasn't it? I think it was him. Certainly, it was an American writer who said politics is for ugly people. He made that a very point. Just let's share something with my viewers and your viewers and people, which may or may not know. I live. You can actually see Drax Power Station from our land. If we've got a small holding, as you know, and not a very big one, but if you go into the stable yard, for example, you can see Drax Power Station. Now, Drax Power Station used to burn coal because it was on top. It was built there because it was on top of a river for cooling the towers, and it was on top of a coal mine. So you dug it out of the ground, you put it in the fire, and it was up until quite recently the cleanest power station. When I say cleanest, the least emissions of any sort. So sulfur and so all the things, carbon monoxide, things that get chucked out of these power stations was all pretty well captured. So it was acknowledged to be the cleanest coal-fired power station, cleaner than anything else in Europe, and certainly cleaner than anything in China. So then they decided to change to wood burning. Now, I used to know some of the engineers down there that said, because you don't need to be an engineer, do you, to know? Any country person knows that coal burns more effectively than wood. Put a bag of coal on the thing and then it'll burn through Christmas Day and probably into Boxing Day. You're putting logs on the fire all the time. So what did they do? They then decided to cut a deal on wood chips imported from North and South America, which they then bring in after the conversion, which cost billions, as you can imagine, on diesel-powered boats to be moved from Immingham and Hull to the power station, which is Selby, with brand new rolling stock, which was diesel, which was lent, the money was lent by the government. So that cost billions. So it comes wood chips, which don't burn efficiently, come from the other side of the world to burn in the power station. And they are building a hole in the ground in just maybe 10 miles away from our village. The biggest hole I think that's ever been built in the history of Europe, just a huge hole, to put in carbon, to capture carbon dioxide and pipe it into a huge hole. Now, with the big growing country, if you go down that River Humber towards Hull, you'll find there's lots of growth. There's lots of cucumbers and tomatoes under glass. Now, what they do there is they have little machines which pump carbon dioxide into the greenhouses. So we're burying it 20 miles up the river and we're sending it, and downriver, they're artificially manufacturing carbon dioxide to grow tomatoes and cucumbers. And it still needs, June, it still needs a £2 million a day subsidy, Drax, because it can't pay for itself. And when I was in office, and after I left office, I was trying to get to the board of directors and so on to tell them this lunacy, this madness, and they stopped seeing me. And they stopped seeing me before the government allowed a grant. So we have here the biggest wood burning establishment, probably in Europe, or certainly Northern Europe. It's the biggest ever. And yet they're telling us that we're not allowed to burn coal, wood in a wood burner in our parlour. And yet the problem that we have here is, where the hell are the journalists? Shouldn't the Minister for the Environment or something be put on the rack by Laura Cheeseburger at the BBC, who's on £300,000 a year? Is she ever going to ask a pertinent question, the stupid cow? What do you make of it all?
Well, it's just like living in through the looking glass. Everything's at the wrong side, isn't it? I mean, one thing I liked about the Austrians when we were in Austria, I mean, they're a bit, they're very orderly. They're like Germans. They do what they're told. But what I liked about them is if there were any European laws that they didn't like, they just didn't obey them. They got round them. even changing room sizes in hotels so you could still smoke indoors. They made smaller lounges with partitions so they could still have cigarettes and pipes. And with power, for instance, they have localized power stations, hydroelectric power stations that use rivers. And we could do this. And they're small, they're absolutely pristine. The power stations have to turn it into like a mini park. So everything, the grass is cut, there's always a lake, there's benches, there's picnic areas. They make it look pretty. And the village that has the power station gets subsidised electric. That's a really good way to run. I mean, the power station in our village looked like a little house. It looked nice, a substation. And they think about the environment more. I mean, you will never get Austrians to not use wood. They have forests simply to grow trees for their cackle ovens, which cackle ovens have to have particularly dry wood. And they're an efficient way of running the thing. It's not like a wood burning stove. You put the wood in the cackle oven and you get it up to full flame. And then as it dies down to embers, you shut the door and you lock it and you don't open it again. And those are in the systems in all these Austrian chalets. This was before central heating. And right through the house is a pipework system with boxes of water, basically, that heat up and stay warm the whole day. And that's with just one fire set. Now these Austrians, they need this. They don't have a lot of gas. They use wood. And they don't have central heating like us. They would use oil. You're not going to change those people. They are not going to start not using oil and wood to come to meet some targets with the EU. They'll do exactly what they want and they'll get around it. We don't do that. We follow the rules to the letter. It's as though we're trying to prove ourselves. We're like, it's like, to me, Britain's involvement with the European Union and their emissions and all the targets they had, it's like being with a dominatrix with no safe word. You can't get out of it. It's like she's going to whip you to death, even when you're begging for mercy because you didn't learn the safe word. And the safe word is we should look after our own. With the power station thing, what really creases me up, how can anybody not see that putting stuff on a ship in South America to trail across the world on a diesel ship is ludicrous, when we could go underground in our own country and get it there. It's nonsense. And we can't even tap into our own supplies of gas. We've got to not do it because we're getting to this net zero. And even your old boss, the Queen, now her son's in charge. I mean, I did crack up, Godfrey, when he did that spoof with Charlie Boy. He's right into it. Now, who's he listening to? He's either listening to really bad advice and not reading anything, or he's got this God complex where he doesn't really want to bother with the silly billies. He's going to do it anyway. Just shut up and pay your damn taxes. I'll believe he's green when he turns Highgrove into allotments for the poor. That's when I know he's serious. When you sit there with, what is it, about 80 acres of manicured gardens, it's ridiculous, the amount. And that's just from Floribunda, of course. So he can wander around when he's there, charming with Camilla. Well, we're not bothered about that. You're taking everything off us so that one day we can say we're at net zero and nothing changes.